Alright, Spiderman PC just launched as of the time of filming, and well, I'm actually super busy today. I've got family visiting from out of state. They're still sleeping from the late night ride from the airport. I just chose to not get enough sleep and replace it with caffeine. But anyway, we've got GTX 1060 6GB as the recommended GPU for this game at 1080p 60 FPS medium settings, and that's what I want to test out in this video. Does the GTX 1060 deliver on that promise? Because that would be really exciting to see. Now, they also don't really list 1440p recommendations, so in this video we'll also see how can the 1060 do at 1440p, especially using upscaling. Now, we're also not going to just test out the medium settings. I'll be looking at turning the settings up, turning the settings down, using resolution scaling methods. This game does feature FSR 2.0, as well as an in-house temporal upscaler from Insomniac Games. Now, I'm going to admit that I'm not going to have as much like side-by-side and thorough investigation content here as I might in some other videos, just due to time constraints on my filming here, but you should get a good idea for how the GTX 1060 runs. Let me hop into the game and get you some of that footage. All right, well, I played a little bit of the beginning of the game off camera just to kind of see how it was going. And I did notice that overall the performance has been pretty good. Now, the settings I'm using here are the settings that the system requirements list did say should be a 60 FPS experience, which is the medium preset. I went ahead and disabled any kind of upscaling, although you can definitely use upscaling to try to increase performance here. And this game both has an Insomniac Games temporal injection, so with their own in-house temporal upscaling solution, as well as AMD's FSR 2.0, which does run on NVIDIA GPUs, including ones like the 1060, which can't run DLSS since they're not RTX cards. Now, we're going to again, though, see if we can get a native resolution, which especially at resolutions like 1080p, tends to be the best looking experience, as upscaling tends to struggle a bit the lower the resolution goes. Now, I'll attempt to actually fight here a bit while talking to you guys and monitoring the performance. But what I wanted to show you guys was that I've noticed that in combat, we certainly do dip below 60 FPS, although I think the average, since we're above 60 FPS a lot of the time as well, I don't think that the 60 FPS average kind of experience here was at all a lie or anything like that. It actually seems fairly accurate. It just doesn't mean that there aren't any dips below 60 FPS, and that's completely to be expected. Those system requirements recommendations in most games tend to be more of a I don't know how to put it, average for sure. And this game, actually, it seems to be more accurate than I've seen in many, although admittedly, like I said, I've only been through the opening sections of the game. Seemed like swinging around the city and such, again, was mostly above 60 FPS with some dips when the view distance goes pretty far here. We could take that death as a good opportunity to now try the same thing, but with the settings adjusted. So if we did try to play on the high settings, let's go ahead and see what sort of performance we get here. Overall, it does look like, we're certainly under 60 FPS a bit here. And it does seem to be staying below 60 FPS a lot more of the time, not getting as many of those jumps above 60 FPS. Now, it doesn't feel awful to play, especially if you have a variable refresh rate monitor or something like that. These dips aren't terrible, so you certainly could try out the high settings if you'd like. Now, I'm going to pretend my deaths there are on purpose as an excuse to benchmark at some even higher settings. So if we go up to the very high settings for this section of the game, let's go ahead and see what happens. Now, if the game didn't have so many graphic settings and I wasn't so busy today, I might explore more further the impact of each individual setting, but I think for this video we're going to have to stick mostly to the presets and the upscaling. I also realize that it's possible that in other scenes, like maybe flying around the city or something, we would have you know, different effects affecting things different, the draw distances, things like that. But yeah, this is still definitely playable at these frame rates, although obviously not a 60 FPS locked experience. But I think if you're using a GTX 1060 in this day and age, you're used to not always getting a locked 60 FPS. Now, it doesn't look like we could go above the very high settings, so we could also try, what if we went the other way around here? Very low settings. Okay, it's looking like now that those settings have had a chance to settle in here, we're now up more into the 70 FPS range more of the time. So if you're somebody who wants to absolutely lock above a 60 FPS experience, either you have a 60 FPS monitor and you want to make sure you're above that and maybe set a 60 FPS frame rate limit, something like that, it looks like you certainly can, at least in this scene that I'm testing here. But like I said, the combat scenes from what I've seen so far tend to be the places I saw the most dips at medium. Seems like we're able to stay well above 60 FPS now with these settings. So why don't we let him take me out here and we'll try something out in between. So that was the very low. I think we've got some in between options. Let's go ahead and try out the low settings. So low settings. All right, now it was below 60 FPS for a second there, but I think the settings can take a second to process, but looks like we're mostly over 60 FPS now. Let me kind of run around. Seemed like when I was in this entryway, maybe there's more reflections and things. Let's see. Does seem to be mostly holding above 60 FPS at the low settings in combat. Saw a brief dip to about 58 there, no big deal. Also note that since I'm recording this on the GPU encoder, there's usually a few percent performance loss. Nothing major, but sometimes when you see the recording dip to like 58 FPS, if I wasn't recording, it might have stayed locked to 60, that kind of thing. So do keep that in mind when we're looking at the results here. And then we would go back up to the medium settings and get one more comparison at that. Now, like I said, at the lower resolutions, I'm not too interested in using upscaling myself, but we could look at what if we wanted to play at the very high settings, but we were willing to use some upscaling to do that. How about we try out FSR 2.0 at the quality setting and see what happens. Generally, I don't like this too much at 1080p, but it will, I think, give us quite a frame rate boost. Okay, let's see. So this is the very high settings now with maintaining above the 60 FPS experience. So it does look like the FSR 2.0 is going to be able to allow you to pretty much max the game out at 1080p with much better frame rates. Looks like, okay, we're still getting a few dips here below 60, so it's not perfect, but that was certainly better than what we were seeing trying to use these same settings without the upscaling. And it doesn't look horrible at all by any means, but I do see, especially in motion here, I'm looking at the lines in the flooring. And I'm definitely noticing a bit of aliasing kind of breaking up, especially in motion as I kind of swing around. I don't know how much the YouTube video is going to kill that in the YouTube compression, but I think here if I turn the upscaling back off, we're going to see that if I do the same things, we're not going to get as much aliasing breakup on motion as I roll around on those lines in the flooring. That's not obviously the only place you'll see the breakup, but we can definitely tell that my frame rate has now significantly dipped down, going down into the 40s again. So it's going to be up to you, I guess, if the the little bit of breakup in motion especially and fuzziness to the image from the upscaling is worth the massive performance boost. Now we could try out the in-house Insomniac Games temporal injection. So again, this will run the game at a lower resolution and try to make it look like it's running at the native resolution. To my eye, especially as I'm like turning the camera and movement, my initial impression is that I think the FSR 2.0 is better. There seems to be even more instability to the lines in motion and such. Frame rate seems somewhat comparable. It's not a dramatic difference, and you know, as we're running through this fighting scene, we're not getting exact apples to apples comparisons. But I think between the two, off this quick first impression, I'm preferring the FSR 2.0 upscale to the in-house Insomniac Games version. We could switch back again one more time just to compare. Yeah, I don't think either one's perfect, but I don't know. I see breakup to the image on both. But like I said, just my kind of subjective initial impression here is that I prefer the look of the FSR. I would need to do some more extensive side-by-side comparison, which I quite frankly just don't have time to do right now, in order to get a more detailed conclusion on that. Perhaps I'll have time to do that in a future video if another channel doesn't do that before I do. Now, I think I'd like to check out some 1440p with upscaling, so give me a second to do that. All right, so I've loaded the game again at 1440p this time around, and I believe I still have it, I think I have it set at the medium setting, so we'd start there. And let me just confirm that for you guys, 1440p. Notice I have upscaling turned off, and we're back on the medium preset. Let's go ahead and get a baseline kind of performance here. Looks like we're above 30 FPS. So if you're a, you know, I'm okay with 30 FPS kind of guy, you could lock to that. Looks like into the mid 40s here, kind of depends on exactly where we're at in the scene, that kind of thing. But what I was kind of interested in is what could these upscaling techniques get us? Could FSR 2.0 come to the rescue and get us any kind of reasonable experience here? We'll start out with the FSR 2.0. And so that's at the quality setting, 1440p. This generally looks pretty good in other games I've tested. Okay, and we are now, you know, it's not 60 FPS, but it's pretty close. I'm looking at the lines in the flooring and things like that in motion. Also look at the character models in motion. Like when Spider-Man moves, I certainly see, like in his legs and things like that, some aliasing and breakup to the image. So it's definitely not a perfect upscale. However, we did see a massive boost to performance. So if you're on a 1440p screen and trying to, you know, play the game at 60 FPS with medium settings, this could be an interesting way to go. Now, we don't want ultra performance. Let's try going to a more aggressive balanced setting and seeing if that can get us more of a 60 FPS experience. Yeah, that does seem to be getting us more of the 60 FPS experience. And yeah, like I said, it's kind of more of the same when it comes to the image quality, especially in motion. If I'm looking, you know, at the edges of his legs and things as we run around, the lines in the flooring, enemies, things like that. It's especially motion where you see the, you know, holes in the upscaling. So definitely not a perfect upscale, but we are seeing a massive performance boost. Remember, we were down into the 30 FPS range much of the time here without any of the upscale. So while maybe it isn't perfect, it's certainly a nice to have. And let's go ahead and give it a comparison to the Infinity Games version. And let's start off with it looks like they have an UltraQuality preset. We could try that. See where we're at performance-wise. The UltraQuality, you know, I'm looking for the same kinds of issues. You know, I almost feel like the edges around Spider-Man, is he a little bit more stable than we saw with FSR 2.0? It's hard to say again without the side-by-side. Certainly still see some upscaling issues. Let's go ahead and kick on a more aggressive version. Let's go to the quality setting here and see if that gets us to 60 FPS at medium. Yeah, definitely in the flooring and such in motion. You know, this isn't horrible, and it's also still getting us, you know, the good performance boost again. Looks like we're once again getting a good 60 FPS gameplay at 1440p. But the other question is basically, is it a better image trade-off to have these upscaling artifacts, or is it better to try lowering settings? Or is it even possible to hit 60 FPS just by lowering settings? So we're gonna go ahead and turn the upscale off, and then we're gonna adjust the graphics settings. Well, first let's go back to that medium settings at the native resolution. So once again, we can compare, you know, here's what we were doing without any of those upscaling. We're down in the 40s, dipping into the 30s. So obviously we were getting massive performance boosts at the trade-off of, you know, a little bit of that image instability, aliasing, sharpness, especially around the edges. But we're gonna see if turning these settings down. And let's just go ahead and jump all the way down to very low just to see if 60 FPS is even possible just by turning the settings all the way down. And we'll give it a second to settle in here, but it's looking to me kind of like the answer is no. I don't think hitting that 60 FPS point just by turning down the settings is even going to be a possibility. So it's really nice to see that we have those temporal upscaling options with FSR 2.0 as well as the Infinity Games tech, and that allows the GTX 1060 to have good performance here, even at 1440p. Overall, I've got to say that I'm very pleased with the optimization of this game. Seeing a GTX 1060 be able to run the game as advertised, 60 FPS medium settings, 1080p. Not that it never dips below 60, but I was certainly averaging 60 FPS-ish, you know, most of the time. And overall, I think this game seems really fun. I haven't played the PlayStation version of it, so I'm gonna, based on my limited experience with it here, definitely recommend this and say that the PC performance seems good. And if you're interested in seeing me test this out on further graphics cards, go ahead and let me know in the comments section. I am pretty busy. I have family visiting and all that, so that's why there's probably less editing on this video and such than you might be used to from me. But we'll see. I might still have time to test out a little bit more. Let me know. I hope all of you have an excellent day.